Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order tonight. Commissioner Olson, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Sir. Salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. First on the agenda are presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda within the jurisdictions of the Commission. I don't have anything for that. We'll go to correspondence and staff communications from the Planning Commission Secretary. Mr. Silly?
Yes, thank you very much. A few items of correspondence to note for you this evening. You should have a few items in front of you. The first is related to upcoming May is Bike Month. We think we're trying to, obviously something we try to promote every year, but with this year, with the Fix 50 project getting ready to start here in only a couple of weeks, May is Bike Month is even more important than ever. So we encourage you to review that, and there's some, if you also have additional questions related to the Fix 50 project, feel free to call us, and we can fill you in on some of that, but that does start April 22nd, and we do expect that to be a significant event. You should also have in front of you the latest summary of the City Council strategic plan. It's on the, I think, the yellow placard that's in front of you, and the 2014 version is also on the wall on the far side of the chambers this evening. Thirdly, you should also have an attorney-client privilege memo from our City Attorney's Office. This is generally in regard to item number 3 on your agenda tonight. We realize this is lengthy, and we don't expect you to be able to totally consume it this evening, but there's some important matters in there for consideration as these projects progress. And lastly, and most importantly, I think it's well known, but our longtime Planning Commission colleague, Babs Sandeen, last night was appointed to serve on the City Council to fill the last 2 years of now Supervisor Oscar Villegas' term. So I think we all should congratulate her, and she's here tonight. And Babs has definitely been one of the best commissioners I think we've ever had, and we will miss her. And whoever replaces her will certainly have big shoes to fill. But she is here tonight, and if you would like to hear from her at all, or say anything to her, now would be a great time.
Well, I was just here, Martha and I were just here last night at this very space about 22 hours ago. I want to thank you all you've been great colleagues, and it's been a tremendous honor to serve on the commission. I look forward to seeing your work as it moves up. Some of it proceeds up, and you're making recommendations to the council, so I look forward to seeing those actions. It's been wonderful working with the staff team here, and I wish you all the best. And thank you for being such great colleagues and thoughtful folks.
It's been an absolute pleasure working with you. Thank you.
Congratulations. And thinking this morning about today's meeting, I just thought I was going to miss you and your valuable input that you have added here that we will now have on the City Council. So we have a great leader now representing us in the City Council.
We consider that you'd be representing the Planning Commission up there, and so, and we rarely ever make a mistake, so
I got that.
You know what to do, okay?
Yeah, and
Good
Charlie,
luck.
it looks like my name. It looks like my seat's going to be right by yours, so my name will be right below yours.
Oh, good.
No.
Thank you, Babs.
Thanks.
We're going to miss you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That concludes Planning Commission Secretary correspondence for tonight.
Thank you. Next on the list is the disclosure of ex parte communications. Martha?
Yes. I had a conversation with the police chief regarding item number 4, the public workshop on zoning for retail sales of firearms and ammunition.
Okay. Anyone else?
I had a conversation with one of the applicants on item number 3.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I've also talked with the applicant on item number 3. one of the applicants?
I've also talked with one of the applicants on agenda item number 3.
All right, thank you. We will go to our regular agenda, public hearing regarding the American Buddhist Seminary conditional use permit.
Were we going to do the minutes first?
Oh, I'm sorry,
Consent agenda.
consent agenda, excuse me.
It'll go fast.
It'll go, yes. Consideration and approval of the minutes for our February 20th meeting.
I move approval of the minutes for the February 20th, 2014 meeting.
Second.
The motion been first and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great, motion passes.
I need to abstain from that one.
Oh, you were gone. Okay. One abstention?
Chair Perez?
Yes.
May we please have a roll call vote?
Okay.
Thank you.
Commissioner Guerrero?
Aye.
Commissioner Moore?
Aye.
Abstain.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Did we get that? Thank you. Now we can move on to the regular agenda. Item number 2, which is the public hearing regarding the American Buddhist Seminary conditional use permit.
Madam Chairman,
Yes.
I have property that's located close to this area, so I'm going to need to abstain from this item.
Okay, great.
Excuse myself. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll call you when we're done.
Good evening, Chair, Commission members. Tonight I'm here before you, I think, first of all, to understand kind of the dynamics of this particular seminary, and when I was doing some of my background, to understand, the Buddhists and their cultural as well as their religion. The one thing that I noticed in the whole process is that they are very calm people. They are very peaceful, and they really are kind of quiet. And I think what's important with this particular site is to understand that it is in an industrial zoned area. There have been some individuals living there, some monks living there at this particular site, and there hasn't really been any conflict, any code issues, or anything that has been alerted to staff as we proceed with this particular use permit. So staff really supports the compatibility between the two, and they understand the location and understand their the vicinity and their adjacent users, and they're very peaceful, and I think they equally coexist pretty well. And so what I'm here before you tonight is to ask for a recommendation of approval for a use permit, which would be for the 9,216 square foot Buddhist seminary. Excuse me. Their focus is to teach and promote quiet introspection, calm abiding, and peaceful family and community relations. They currently have a membership of about 25 families, so it's very small. Their operating hours are from 7 until 8 a.m., or sorry, 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. One thing I asked the applicant is, would there be regular hours and attendance similar to what I'm used to in a Christian type of church? And the answer was no, because they have more or less sporadic visits with their members. So they visit the site within that time range. And outside of any major celebration that's noted in your staff report, which are a couple a year, they really don't have a congregation of people coming to the site regularly like I would experience going to Catholic Mass or something of that nature. So I think the compatibility out there and what we will see is, I think, similar to what it's already out there, which is a very low-key kind of seminary. Not really know that they're there, but knowing that they're doing something, valuable, and they appreciate passing that on to the people and residents and membership. I think one of the things that I'll characterize too, what they plan to do with this particular development is build it in 2 phases. So there'll be a single-story phase that will come in phase 2, roughly about 3,600 square feet, and then there'll be a 5,000 square foot Phase 2, which will be a 2-story. And the Phase 2 will advance just based on funding and their efforts to see that come to fruition. The other thing on Phase 2, that component mainly would be a facility with a kitchen, some lounge areas, as well as kind of a communal area for people to gather for their events that they hold at this particular facility. The Phase 1 will be more or less their meditation area and a library, a lot of things related to their particular religion and prayer groups. The other thing I think that's important is in the Phase 1, they're planning to construct 19 parking spaces. Per the requirements in the city zoning ordinance, there is a total of 34 parking spaces. Ultimately, when this particular development is built out, it will have all planned 35 parking spaces. So the two big things and issues and concerns that staff had and had to want to kind of analyze per the applicant and moving this forward was to find a way where we can allow a short-term type of parking scenario, which is when an applicant comes in, they are required to construct the full parking for their particular development, regardless of a Phase 1, Phase 2. But after looking at their membership, the functionality of their church, staff was able to kind of get a different view and a perspective that things are a little bit different with this particular type of seminary than a normal church. So in consulting with fire and engineering and the various internal departments and divisions, we felt that it was okay for them to advance a shortfall of parking for just a Phase 1. So what this approval will do will allow Phase 1 to be built and constructed with only 14 parking spaces in this first phase. And then the remainder, 19 parking spaces in the first phase and 16 parking spaces coming in Phase 2. So we felt very comfortable, just based on what we heard as far as their membership, that this was not going to be problematic or we would have any leakage into the public street. And then the other analysis and thing that we really looked into was their special events. As characterized in the staff report, there are two large celebration events that they have on the site. What we ascertained from the applicant is that currently with the monks living on the site, they do have larger scale events at this, more or less, some will call them house parties, but people come in a larger congregation currently, and they actually coexist with the surrounding users. So what they provided to me is a detailed kind of plan that they roll out when they do have a larger function, and they will implement that plan when this seminary is built out, where they will talk to the neighbors. They'll actually even go so far as to secure some parking from the surrounding vacant properties within their area. Tops, as far as how many people are involved in the celebration, is roughly about 100 people. In our mind, in the planning world, that's really not that many, and we think that with their outreach and what they communicated to us, what they currently do, we think that that should be okay. In addition, and generally with the celebration, the city likes to kind of let those particular groups self-police themselves and kind of determine really when they need to come in and really talk to us about securing additional parking and maybe potentially even going down a path of a special event permit. But we felt in this case that it was not necessary to kind of go down a special event, and we felt that based on the background that they provided, it would be sufficient to allow the church, the seminary, to continue and allow them to have a couple of celebration events during the course of a year. So with that, we feel confident that they will move forward with Phase 1. There are conditions of approval which are pretty standard. The applicant is aware that they will need to get clearance from building and the various groups internally to advance the project to construction and design, and they're fully aware of that and accept that condition, and there hasn't been any communication related to any problems with the conditions of approval at this time. So with that said, staff is recommending approval of the use permit for the American Buddhist Seminary Church with the respected CEQA requirements and Class 32 exemption. The applicant and the applicant group are here today. We communicated, and they are prepared to answer any questions that may come up related to the functionality or anything that the commission may have for them as far as inquiries. But at this point, they feel that they're comfortable with the way that the staff report is written and the conditions of approval, and just want to continue to move forward with this project.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions?
I have one question regarding the parking as it relates to the notice of the hearing sent to property owners. Was there any notification of the event, or could there be notification of the event so they're prepared if it might impact them?
So what you're referring to is meaning
The notice
not
of
the notice of
hearing.
hearing, but when an event occurs. My understanding, they don't, send out a mailer to the surrounding property owners, but they do knock on doors
Okay.
to inform them that the one of the two events is occurring
Okay.
during that time. So they do a foot outreach, so to say.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank
Okay.
you.
Any other questions?
I'm just curious, how long have they been at the current location? Yeah.
7 years.
There were no negative comments in the 500-foot.
I did not receive a phone call or a comment, or we'll see if anybody's here.
And I understand you mentioned that phase 2, part 2 is dependent on funding. Is there a target date, phase 2, part 2, dealing with the additional part?
Yeah, not at this time. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay. I'd like to open up the public hearing. Do we have any questions for the applicant? Would the applicant like to come and speak? Please state your name.
Yes, good evening, everyone. My name is Alan Hoshida. I'm an architect with Hoshida & Reyes, and I'm representing the American Buddhist Seminary as the formal applicant for this project. Before I begin, I do want to say something in front of the Planning Commission, because I serve on the Sacramento County Planning Commission currently and for the last 3.5 years. So I want to thank you folks for providing your volunteer and providing the service to the city of West Sacramento. So I know the amount of time and effort that it takes on your side of the dice. So I really appreciate that. In representing the American Buddhist Seminary, we concur with all of the conditions of the staff report and have no objections to it. But if there are any comments or questions relative to either the design or any of the operations, we do have a number of folks representing the American Buddhist Seminary ownership as well as the members here tonight. And at the same time, I did want to thank Jim for really providing a lot of input, and he did ask a lot of questions of us during the meetings that we've had with him and throughout the last few months that this project has been in progress. So I appreciate the planning staff support on this project as well. Are there any questions that you might have?
I just want clarification on the question you asked regarding funding in Phase 2. Did you get, as far as the funding being available, that was the question you asked?
Well, no, it sounds like phase 2 is dependent on funding, and that hasn't been identified yet.
Right.
Yes.
So my question was, is there a target date for phase 2?
Not at this time. Right now, one of the things that we're trying to do is get the conditional use permit approved. One of the things that the American Buddhist Seminary is going for, once we receive the approval here tonight, hopefully, is to go out for a marketing for a capital campaign. And that'll really establish, I think, the timelines for both Phase 1 and Phase 2. So if they have the adequate funds, they could proceed right away. But because of the potential for not having enough funds to do the whole project at one time, yeah, and we have done this in a lot of other churches and master plans, is to get the overall approval based on what the ultimate build-out would be, and recognize that we could build those in phases once we trigger the initial phase one. So what that does is there's a lot of value in that, and that the ownership doesn't have to come back for additional approvals from planning. Okay. Yes, but at this time-wise, it's, yeah, unless...
So my only concern, I guess, and
Yes.
Jim, that was a great presentation, thank you, I think I understand, is it sounds like there's really only a couple of days a year when there's a large event, and the rest of the traffic is folks coming in, spiritual meditation and whatnot. It sounds like at this point it's a small congregation.
Yes.
However, that may grow, and that may increase. My only concern is the parking and congregation grows. I'm not really concerned about the 2 times a year. I'm sure there's a overflow plan in place for parking, but eventually parking could become an issue, and that was my only.
Yes, and we'll have to monitor that. But we do have the property. If there's excess parking that's required, for example, in phase one,
The overflow area.
Yeah, the area is there within the property boundary itself. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much.
I just have a comment. Sorry, just wanted to say thank you for being here in the community. It's good to have you present and offering our community another opportunity to share their faith.
Commissioner Olson, did you have any comment?
No comment. I would actually move the recommended action.
Can we close the public
Let me
hearing?
close the public hearing. Okay, since we've asked all of our questions, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. And
And move the recommended action under approval, item number 1.
I'll second that.
I'm going to request a roll call vote, please.
we'll start with Commissioner Guerrero.
Aye.
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 Aye. Yes.
Can I request that next time we do that, we have Cindy read off the names?
Actually, may we do that right now? For a proper roll call, we need all the planning commissioners who are voting and those who are abstaining to be named for the record. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Olson,
Aye.
Commissioner Liebig,
Aye.
Commissioner Moore. Oh, excuse me.
Abstain.
Commissioner Galvan,
Aye.
Commissioner Perez.
Aye.
Thank you. Guerrero.
Commissioner Guerrero.
Commissioner Guerrero.
Aye.
Thank you.
Right. Any interested party may appeal the decision of the Planning Commission in this matter to the City Council by filing a written appeal with the City Clerk within 15 days of tonight's action, and the appeal must be accompanied by the appropriate filing fee.
Bring Charlie back.
You may
Great.
be eating
Thank you.
downstairs.
Charlie went to the fashion show.
We got to bring Charlie back in.
Can you find Charlie for us?
Somebody want to give him Olive?
Oh, and I need her to load my PowerPoint.
Right. We'll just take a couple of minutes to wait for Commissioner Moore. Who's on his way in?
Right now, the music's
Party's much better out front.
We figured we lost you to that.
It was a debate.
Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to item number 3, public workshop on the proposed wireless facilities to be located at 1245 Linden Road and 3199 South River Road.
As Associate Planner Kathy Allen will present this item.
Good evening, Chair Perez and members of the commission. This is a workshop, so because of that, we're not asking for a formal vote on anything tonight. We are, however, very much looking for your comments and concerns. And so this project, Cindy, can I have the next slide? As a little history, in 2000, the Planning Commission approved a conditional use permit for the construction of the existing monopine telecommunication facility, which is located at the easterly terminus of Linden Road and South River Road. In early 2012, the tower owner, who is Crown Castle, was informed by WSAFCA that the tower would have to be removed to allow for the continuing flood improvements in that area of the city. The projects up for review tonight are two separate monopine facilities. Each facility has its own separate application, and the projects are located on adjacent properties. Both projects are being proposed as a replacement for the existing facility. CUP 1402, which is being proposed by Crown Castle, the owner of the existing tower, while CUP 1403 is being proposed by Rick Hart, the property owner of 3199 South River Road. So the Crown Castle facility is proposed for 1245 Linden Road. We do have a vicinity map that shows the existing tower and where both proposed facilities are. So the one project is proposed for 1245 Linden Road, the other at 3199 South River Road. And we're asking that they be reviewed together tonight due to their close proximity and similarity. Have the next slide, Cindy. In 2013, the city's wireless policy was updated by staff. I'm sure the commission remembers hearing that. The policy was reviewed by both the Planning Commission and then approved by the council in late 2013. The applications before you are the first wireless projects to utilize the revised policy. Staff, in reviewing both applications, has discovered that there may, however, be a conflict with portions of the policy. Section 2D states that an applicant may apply for a telecommunications permit when the facility is between twice the height of the pole and 500 feet from another residentially zoned property. However, Section G3, which is section detailing with prohibited facilities, states that wireless facilities that are located at a distance of less than twice the height of the pole from the nearest residential zoned property are prohibited. Neither property can actually comply with Section G3. When changes were made to the policy, staff did instigate a preference hierarchy for the types of facilities they were looking for in the city. However, due to the semi-rural nature of the sites in question, it may not be practical to construct anything in this area except a freestanding tower, which is the lowest preference in the hierarchy. Federal and state statutes do severely limit the scope of what a local jurisdiction may use to review a telecommunications facility. The areas that are allowed to be reviewed primarily are down to aesthetics. In this semi-rural area, it's unclear if another parcel exists where a portion of the policy to comply with G3 could actually be found. Not approving a substitute project in the near vicinity could potentially result in coverage gaps if the existing tower is removed without a replacement structure. Staff is still looking for complete gap analysis carrier by carrier to see what we're looking at if the tower was removed and not replaced. Granting a variance for either project may not be possible due to the limited parameters that can be used for granting a variance. If the commission ultimately wishes to approve either project, it may be necessary to actually amend the wireless policy to address this issue prior to hearing either project at a public hearing. Thanks. The two projects are actually very similar to one another in size and scope. CUP 1402 includes a 108-foot tall monopine structure with 4 separate equipment buildings. The project would be located near the southern edge of a 1-acre parcel which fronts on Linden Road. The site contains an existing residence. Access to the site would be from a gravel road which would be constructed off of Linden Road. The project would require the removal of several existing trees, and if this was done, it may require a permit from the city's urban forest manager if the trunks are greater than 24 inches at a height of 4.5 feet. The applicant for this project has submitted 4 letters of intent from various carriers regarding co-location on the tower. CUP 1403 includes a 125-foot tall monopine structure and an associated equipment building. This facility is being proposed to be located on what would be the remnant of an existing 9.42 acre parcel. WSAFCA is proposing to acquire the balance of this parcel for their levee improvements in the area. The remnant parcel would be approximately 0.8 of an acre in size and would be a landlocked parcel. The applicant has submitted exhibits showing proposed access to the site from Linden Road. City staff does still need to review that to determine if this will both be feasible and adequate. And the applicant still needs to demonstrate how power will be received to the site. We do have some photo simulations of both projects and elevations. This here shows CUP 1402 with the monopine and the 4 equipment structures. And then the next slide shows the existing monopine on Linden Road from the same view with the proposed monopine. And then the next slide shows the project site from Linden Road without and with the proposed tree. Then this is the second project, the 3199 South River project, their version of the monopine. The first photo simulation, if you can go to the next slide, also shows the existing tree and the proposed monopine. And then the final slide shows the proposed site without and with the tree. And that concludes staff's presentation. We're happy to entertain any questions. I would like to note there are the applicants for both projects are here, and they would be willing to take your comments and concerns as well. Thank you.
Before I go to the request, I don't have any requests to speak for this item. Do we have any questions for staff?
There are no requests to speak? Sorry. Okay, then I do, if that's okay.
Sure.
Kathy, for clarification, I don't want to get into the details of the individual towers at this point. I want to focus back on the ordinance itself, given that we did spend a lot of time on this. Specifically, is the tower not allowed at the spot, or is it allowed with a conditional use permit?
At this time, our reading of the new policy, it seems pretty clear without a revision of some sort to the policy that it would both would most likely be prohibited. We had entertained the possibility of an exception, and after review with the city attorney, we don't think that option could possibly be available at this time.
It's conceivable that with some adjustments in the projects, they may be able to get within this, setback, requirement that's in the policy. We haven't, vetted that, with either applicant or, sort of done those, calculations. But the policy is clear that a facility that's less than twice the height of that proposed facility from any residentially zoned property is under the prohibited facilities. Partially why we wanted to bring this up as well tonight is that, this entire area is zoned residential. And, there has been a facility out there for a number of years now. And so if that facility is going to move or need to move, it's something that we may still wish to entertain in this general vicinity, but remains to be seen if either project, given the particulars of those properties, both under current configuration and future configuration, would be able to comply with this policy, or would the Planning Commission, recommend that we entertain some type of modifications to the policy to try to accommodate them in their current configuration or some modification, noting that that would also take City Council review on the policy. So I think it's really clear we have quite the kind of quandary that we're in right here, especially given what the limitations and our discretion that we have over such facilities, under federal law, that we need to make sure we're not running afoul of. So it's why tonight, at this time, at least we're still entertaining both applications, noting that at least on the surface we do have some conflicts, potential conflicts, but though there may be a path to resolve those if the Planning Commission is amenable to potentially entertaining some revisions or exceptions into the policy.
So, just two questions. One, the current tower would be a legal non-conforming use as we modified the policy last year.
This city attorney may have to weigh in here, but it did have a use permit that was approved for it originally as the policy was written at that time, and so it would have been considered a conforming use. But we still consider it a conforming use based on virtue of having the use permit, even though the policy has changed since then?
Even though the policy has changed, if a use is conforming with the conditional use permit that was originally granted for it, it would be still allowed. And just to reiterate, the FCC allows cities to regulate wireless facilities based on both land use policies as well as aesthetic purposes. Here, the city's wireless facilities policy contains setback requirements for aesthetic purposes, and there are two potential approaches in moving forward with these types of facilities. Number one, the applicants would be required to reduce the height so that it meets the setback requirements of the policy. Or number two, the wireless policy would have to be amended to reduce or eliminate the setback requirements.
So prior to, well, I guess the big question here is, prior to taking this up, prior to any approval, we would need to modify the policy or provide clarification on the policy first.
If they cannot somehow modify their projects in some way, shape, or form from their current configuration, then it's likely we would need to entertain some modification to the policy, both Planning Commission and City Council.
Okay, I'm going to hold off on my comments on the actual towers themselves. Thank you.
Okay. Before I go,
Could I just ask a question before we move on? David, when we did the one at Vickers,
Yes.
how did we accomplish that under what we're talking about?
That one is set at twice the height and about 1 inch from the nearest residentially zoned property. That, if you may recall, that one was proposed originally right at the back corner of that property, adjacent, because that was a commercial property and had residential to the west. Originally, when it was proposed to be in the back corner of that property, right adjacent to residential. That was going on, and that's sort of what prompted us reworking the wireless policy. So that tower, then they actually moved it on the site more toward the center of the property, and so with its height at 80, plus or minus 80 feet, it is about a little more than twice the height of that from the nearest residentially zoned property.
Okay.
So they were able to squeeze it in there.
Okay.
I've since gotten, or received 2 requests to address the Planning Commission, so I'll call up David Haddock. David Haddock, is he here?
Good evening, everyone. I am here to, my name is David Haddock, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
I'm here to speak on behalf of the Rick Hart proposal. I think as the applicant, he was expecting to be able to speak without submitting a form, if that's not possible. Is that possible?
That is normal.
Oh, you have his?
I don't have it. I just said
No.
that's normally
That's-
what we do.
Oh, okay.
We were anticipating presentations or some remarks from each applicant this evening, and so if that's something that the commission wishes to entertain, prior to open it to general public comment, you can do so.
Has staff worked out, it's a little odd having 2 applicants under the same workshop. Has staff worked out the order of which the applicants were going to present?
When I discussed it with them, I had thought that the Crown Castle application would go first and then Mr. Hart would follow, only because in staff's presentation, we took them in numerical order, but ultimately, you can hear them in whatever order you want.
I would be interested in hearing the applicants. Anybody else? So would I.
Yes, me too.
Are both applicants present?
Yes, they're both
And
here.
Mr. Haddock too, but in the normal order that we would usually go.
I'd be happy to speak later, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll go with Crown Castle first then.
Good evening. My name's Tim Page with Crown Castle. I want to thank the commission for allowing us to bring the project to you. Before we get going, I want to mention the professionalism that David Tilley and Kathy Allen have showed all through this process. They've been absolutely great to work with. I have actually worked with staff for a number of years, and I've always found the city of West Sac to be extremely helpful. I actually first began work with them when you guys were located on the east side of the river, and you'd always know where you were when you got out of the car to go into the building. So I don't know if anybody's here that would remember what I'm talking about, but anyway, the city's come quite a ways since then. So as everyone's aware, we've submitted an application to relocate this tower, and we've done so at the request of the city of West Sacramento, which is facilitating the Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency for the amount of road they have to take, which affects the location of the tower. So the proposed location, can we put the graphic back up that shows the 3 towers? I think that'd be very helpful for people to see. So in our application, the proposed new location is about 740 feet west of the existing location. So this is unique for me because we're not installing a new tower. We already have a tower in the neighborhood. We're moving this tower. So all of the concerns that have been raised as a result of this are the same concerns as if the tower never moved. It's kind of a difficult thing to grasp, but we're not coming into the community and requesting, hey, we're going to put a brand new tower down. We are responding to a request to relocate the existing one, and it's not even that far away. The difference between, I just wanted to show everyone right there. So the difference between the 2 applications is approximately 200 feet. It's very, very odd that you'd run into this kind of situation. Crown believes that our application should be the leading candidate in the decision-making process. The Crown Tower is being taken as a result of developments involving the city of West Sacramento. So we've acted in a judicious manner to respond to that request to move this tower. We would ask that the city of West Sacramento grant us primary rights in the decision to locate 1 cell tower in this area. Our application was submitted first. Crown has firm commitments from all the current cell providers that are on the existing tower to move to the new tower. Crown currently manages 6 rooftop and 8 standalone facilities in the city of West Sacramento area. We have a proven track record of managing and operating cell tower facilities in the local area. So while we hope the decision on the tower is clear, which one you choose, we also recognize that the Planning Commission has a significant obstacle to overcome with regards to the height requirement and the residential setback. So I'd like to conclude with the fact that Crown has the resources to be able to move this tower, get the new one constructed and the old one removed in 2014. So at this time, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you may have.
Do we have any questions for this applicant?
I would have one.
Charlie?
Just, if we don't have a cell tower down there, what happens to the coverage in that area?
You have a significant drop-off at I-5, and that's one of the reasons why.
That's on the other side of the river. We don't
That's
care.
correct.
I don't care about that.
Except when you're driving on I-5.
Well, that's true.
So that's one of the reasons why that location is prime, and the further you move west, the more drop-off you have. And that's why the height of the tower is critical. So what we did is we just took the existing tower, same height, same configuration, everything, moved it to here. There'll obviously be some changes as we go down the development process. But the height is a significant requirement for anybody who is proposing to build there.
Actually, I have one question. Is the monopine the only type of tower that reaches at that height? We've seen other types of towers. And
you know, we've worked very closely with staff, and David and Kathy feel this is an appropriate tower. Design. Having said that, we are completely open to design. But the height is significant. So does it have to be a monopine? No.
No, so I understand that, but I guess my question is, are other designs conducive to that height? Or is it monopine? I recall there was an issue last time we looked at these, and this is really more of a...
I'm probably not being clear. No matter what the design is, you have to get the antennas to a certain height. Okay. So it wouldn't really matter if it was a water tower, a clock tower, a monopine, eucalyptus tree, whatever design you need.
Anybody else have questions for the applicant? Commissioner Olson?
You kind of alluded to this in your statement, but is it your feeling that since there's already a tower there, that this should be kind of grandfathered in, so to speak?
I don't know if grandfather is correct. Our feeling is, you know, well, I'm getting up to be that age. I don't really like to use that metaphor, but Crown already has a facility there. We're responding to essentially a take. It's not your take. I'm sure it has to do with the Corps of Engineers, whoever it is. So we feel, hey, all we want to do is we want to be made whole. We'll take the tower, keep it as close as we can, keep the configuration, but we feel that the city has an obligation to do that, rightly or wrongly.
And at one time you were granted the permit to do this in that area.
Well, we've got the CUP,
right.
Correct.
And you would like that just to be kind of transferred?
We'd like to.
I'm looking at this from the standpoint that we might have to amend our telecommunications policy.
I understand.
And we already have established cell towers.
Right.
So your opinion on this is?
Yeah, and I can talk a little bit about why we're located where we are, if anybody, I'm sure you're kind of curious why there's two. So I can spend a little time on that if you'd like.
Sure, go ahead.
I'm sorry? Yes. So my job is very simple. My job is buildability, and can we get this thing done? So the information given to me in December was, can I build this at this location? So what do? I look at, do I have a parcel? I have a parcel. Do I have access? I have access. Can I get utilities to that parcel? Yes, you can. You know, will it pass zoning? Yes, it will. As we look at the proposed second application, we reviewed that and we weren't able to conclude it's a buildable site. So what do I mean by that? You don't even have a parcel. There's no recorded parcel. There's no, I don't know when the road abandonment's going to be done. I don't know when the new parcel map's going to be done. We didn't know how we'd access the site, and we didn't know how we would provide utilities to that site. So at the information that we had at the time, the site we chose is buildable, it's constructible, it meets most of the zoning conditions, and that's why we chose that site.
Thank you.
There's been a lot of, there's information in your packet about conflicts of interest. Crown highly resents that statement. There's been no conflict of interest. We would have everything to lose and nothing to gain by trying to do something like that. This has no bearing on anybody who works for the city of West Sacramento. This is strictly a business decision of how this ended up on this parcel.
Thank you.
I'd like to request the ability to call Mr. Page back up later if we have any specific questions.
Okay.
I might have some questions on
Sure.
carriers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Could we have is Mr. Hart in?
I'm Rick Hart. I'm the applicant for the other project. And I'd like to thank everybody for having me. And I would like to get our first slide up. I'd like to start off with the first problem that was presented, which was the access to our property. So
Cindy?
I put, this is in the packet, is in your packet. This is the access road, which will allow permanent access to the property site. The site already has power. I don't know why anybody would think it would be a problem. Talked to the fire department. We didn't have a copy of this map. I sent it over to him today. The temporary access for construction can all come down through the driveways and everything that we have now. We don't have any issues with any of that. I don't know why anybody would think that would be a problem, but it is not. This will be our permanent access once the West Sac Flood Control takes their property. And that is their road, and they are providing us an easement for access to that road, and they are here to talk about that if you need them here. The second thing is, and I'll let the other guys talk more about that, is the carriers. If this is where we need to go, then I believe the carriers will come. I have a cell tower now. I did it without Crown. I did it without. It's not rocket science. This second picture that we're looking at here, this is what I feel is a little bit better site map than the one that the city provided you. This shows our parcel in the yellow, Crown cell tower in the blue, our cell tower in the orange, and the $1 million homes that are going to go around Crown cell tower. If you want to know why you got a letter from the lawyer and the surgeon that own the property there, that's it. He strongly feels that that cell tower is going to drop the price of those two lots minimum. And he is very adamant about it. He just paid a lot of money for that property. He's going to do over $1.4 million in improvements to get it up, and doesn't see any reason why, if you had anywhere else to put that tower, it would need to go in somebody's backyard. Let's get to next one. That's Crown's current tower. I'm sure we're all tired of looking at it. It's not the prettiest thing, and it's really damaged the monopine in West Sac as far as aesthetics. So I wanted to get the next one. This is what they can look like. You can make them look nice. They don't have to be hideous. Let's go to the next. The Crown site plan. This site plan is not in your packet. I don't know why. I was told they were saving on paper. This is their site plan, and what you're looking at is you're looking at a road that they're going to have to build. That road is going to have to support a 70,000-pound fire truck. That's going to be an actual real road, just like the one you drive on to get to it. It's going to be a TI-6. It's going to have massive base. It's going to be constructed just like a regular road. It's not a driveway. It's not. It may be gravel. It's still going to have compaction. Those two orange blotches you see on there, flip to the next screen. Those are oak trees. When you go back and you look at this, you'll see that the turnaround that they're using for the, we're going to back it up one. The turnaround for the fire truck goes right around that big oak tree. It's not mentioned in the staff report. It's not mentioned in the staff report that that road that they have to build is going to be on the zero lot line. It's going to be no setback. The size between the house and the property line is 19.8. You need 20 feet. And the road is right now 15. They're going to have to make it at least 20. You'll probably get a little bit of a gap in there, but I mean, you're still looking at a 20-foot road, TI-6, in a massive, good-sized road. You can't, it's not going to be a driveway. Not going to be throw down some gravel and it's going to be okay. Let's go on to, click through. Okay, this last one. This is a landscape plan that we want to use for our property. So in order to keep it from it being a problem with any of the neighbors, we have a well and we have power, and we're able to landscape it, and we have that. This is just an idea. We got some redwoods circling around the property. We're keeping all the existing foliage, so we'll set these back. So this will be in addition to what's already there. And then we'll put some more around the towers itself, and put in they want to put like a horse resting area, so a couple of park benches, a water, drinking fountain. That's my mother when I say. So there'll be a hitching post and some other things in there to make it into something useful. That's what we'll do with the rest of the land around the tower. There's nothing else going to be on the tower. It'll have access, power, fiber, everything. I believe it is the far better choice, without question. I don't know what they were thinking. I mean, putting it in someone's backyard is, to me, I mean, what are you going to tell the next person when they wanted? I wanted that tower in my backyard. It is in my backyard. I look out my window right now, I see the water tower. I mean, that would have been nice, but it's not going to happen. They don't go in residential backyards like that. This is a very unique property. This is part of the take area. They're part of the take area. You know, we're all in the same boat. This is a very specific thing going on here. You would relocate it from a take area to the take area. You would get a big savings to the flood control agency. They don't have to purchase that property. So you're talking about a savings of hundreds of thousands of dollars for them. It just never made any sense. And I've been talking to Crown for over a year. I don't think they ever really looked at it, to be honest with you. Everybody tells me they did, but I ask them to find the document, tell me what I wanted. They never, I don't honestly think they ever really looked. They were happy with what they had. They figured they could put it in the backyard, and they were done. I told them the subdivision was going in around them. Nobody would listen. I couldn't get anybody to listen over there. I really tried. I made multiple phone calls. I sent them copies of the maps, the subdivision maps, whatever I could give them. I mean, that's a subdivision that somebody wants to do and put a lot of money into this town, and there's someplace else to put it. So with that, I'd just like to say that I truly believe that that is a much better location. I don't believe that you're going to have anybody come in and say, hey, I got the same thing. I want it here. Nobody's going to come up with the same problems that we had. We've been dealing with this take for over 7 years. Our first email came from this city in 2007 in January. So we've been dealing with this for 7 years, and now we know what we're going to get. So, you know, it's nobody's fault. It just is what it is. So, any questions?
Do you have any questions for this applicant? I'll start down with Commissioner Guerrero.
No questions.
Commissioner Moore.
Rick, did you guys look at some alternative other than a pine tree?
We could. I mean, I can have the engineers see if they can fit it inside. I mean, we got some room. I don't know. I mean, we could try.
I think you've heard the comment already that
Mhm.
something better than a pine tree would be nice for either location. I don't know what our options are, but
I mean, I'm open to it. I'm not the one building the tower. These guys are going to be building the tower. So I'm open for it. It's, whatever you guys decide. I'm just saying that this is the better spot for it. It makes more sense. You're not going to have anybody walk in 2 weeks and want it in their backyard, and you have to tell them why they can't have it. I mean, what reason would you give them?
Commissioner
So-
Olson, do you have any questions?
Yeah, the project number one mentioned that they're not, 100% sure, that they're kind of shaky on what the final property of project number two is going to look like. We want to hear from the flood control folks on.
If you want, I'm sure.
I mean, you're
it's
you're
staked.
happy that it's going to look like the map that you've showed us, right?
The stakes are in the ground. I mean, it can't get any clearer on how much you're going to have and how much you're not going to have. So it's not, the property's already been appraised when they'll tear it down. I mean, you can work around that. Everything else is already there. You can bring in everything through the driveways that are set up now. And then when everything's put in, you'll be done. You come access, your access will come in through the road. The road's already laid out. It's already staked.
Commissioner Olson, you may wish to refer to Attachment 5 in the staff report. This is an exhibit prepared by WSAFCA for appraisal purposes, and although this is not based on 100% plans yet, it tells the story well enough of the land that is proposed to be acquired by WSAFCA in this area, and this is specific to Mr. Hart's parcel. And you can
Yeah,
see.
I saw that. It just seemed like everybody was on board with that, except for the Project One applicant.
Well, this exhibit here, we wanted to show what the future condition was going to be like with the levee improvements, because I think the magnitude of those, particularly in this area, is not necessarily well understood. But you can see this map here. All of the, the shaded area in the red is already under easement, and then the crosshatch area, in blue is the area that actually would need to be acquired by WSAFCA for levee improvements in this area. So you can see there toward the upper corner that there is a triangular piece of property that would be left over of, roughly 0.8 of an acre, and that's where Mr. Hart is proposing to put his facility. But this is a, significant acquisition of this, property. It's, most of it, and then some. So that's really, this is what the future condition would be like.
Future state, okay.
And that future is perhaps not that far away, a couple of years maybe. So we wanted to put this in there to kind of understand sort of what the future condition would be like in this particular area.
And in that future state, obviously, there would be no residents
Right.
on that property.
Yeah, no house. We do keep the well. The well's outside the take area, so we'll have well power. We'll be able to keep the landscape watered and keep it looking good. And, I also, I'd probably work with either the Horse Club or the Rotary Club to turn it into some sort of localized park. And whether it's horses, bikes, whatever ties into that system, I think they're all going to tie in there at some point.
Great.
So.
Commissioner Rubin?
Mr. Hart, thanks. I have one question. No. I'm sorry. I have a question. I have one question regarding the access road. You mentioned that once the flood control project is finished, there will be an access road, and it will be owned by West Safeco.
Yes.
So they will be providing you a legal easement.
Yes.
For, I guess, in perpetuity, which you'll be able to access your site on.
For the cell towers, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, they're not going to let me stick a house out there or anything, I don't think, right?
Is that staff's understanding as well?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
Hold on. Commissioner Gavin, do you have any questions?
So I don't know if it's questions, more comments. I I'm a little confused because I've heard there is access, there isn't access, I've heard there is power, I've heard there isn't power, I've heard we may have to move oaks or we may not have to move oaks, and I think there's probably some work to be done.
So no questions for this applicant, though?
Finally going to look like. Let me get to that. So, well, you know what? Let me. No, I'll wait for staff on this one.
Okay.
I'll wait for staff on this one.
We have three-phase power now. I don't know how much power they need, but so.
Okay, you can take a seat. Thank you for
Right.
your. Before we go questions to staff, I'll go ahead and ask for the David Haddock, if you would wish to come up and speak.
Good evening again, everyone. I appreciate the time to speak to you this evening. As mentioned, my name is David Haddock. I'm here speaking on behalf of the Rick Hart proposal. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about our development team. I started working in telecom in 1990. Other members of the team have been working for about 15 years. We've altogether done more than 500 wireless projects, including many new site builds such as this. We have some experience with it. And what I would say, based upon my experiences, is sort of like the old Field of Dreams movie you might remember, which is if you build it, they will come. That's sort of the case here. From my experience, wireless carriers care about achieving their coverage objectives. And whatever tower allows them to achieve those coverage objectives is the tower that they're going to use. And so what we're striving for is to build a tower that will accomplish those things. I know there is a concern about setbacks. My calculations suggest that in order to satisfy the city's wireless policy, the tower would have to be quite a bit shorter, probably in the 60-foot range, and I think it would be very difficult to meet coverage objectives with a tower that small. But I also know that there are, as long as the height can be achieved, there are many different options for disguising the tower to make it blend in with the surroundings. There's different types of trees. Our feeling when we were preparing the proposal in this case was that an evergreen tree seemed to fit with the neighborhood better. There are palm trees. You know about water towers. There are different ways to disguise a facility like this. It's just a question of finding the one that seems to blend best with the neighborhood, and that's something we're committed to doing. As you know, Crown Castle is a large and very capable company. I don't have anything negative to say about them. But this tower, if you've seen it, could be in better shape than it is. There are quite a few branches that are piled up on the ground. It would be better for it to look good. What you might find as you consider our proposal is that a smaller team that is focused on one tower or two might be able to maintain this tower and make it look better. My colleague Zachary Carter and I are here to answer any questions that we can for you, but I certainly appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Would Mr. Carter like to come up and speak?
Good evening. My name is Zachary Carter. Today I actually had the benefit of meeting with AT&T, some RF engineers, and in the area there's a few AT&T sites, but they are looking to expand. They basically are not producing the results that they were looking for. So when I brought this to them, they're very interested in going on the tower, and that's kind of, we expected that, because AT&T is doing a big push on new site builds and expanding their current network to keep up with the Joneses with everybody else. So they are interested. That's kind of why we put the height at 125 feet, because we're actually almost assuming there'd be a 5-carrier site, as long as the carriers don't continue to buy themselves out. But that's why the height. But, you know, if there was actually only 4 carriers, because Nextel and Sprint are kind of one, they will most likely merge. We'd be more than happy to reduce it back down to what the existing cell site is. Also, yeah, if you, once again, Crown's a very large company. They're a great tower company, but they did purchase this year. I'm not quite sure if you know, they purchased all of AT&T tower. Well, not all, but quite a few for several billions of dollars. So they now manage just most of the Bay Area's AT&T towers. That's a lot to take on without really gaining some staff. And that's why I think kind of like this site is kind of in a disrepair. But it's, you know, if somebody would have said something, I'm sure they would have went out and put it back into adequate shape. But since nobody is asking or complaining, it just sits, which is understandable. But that's about all I had, was just the news that AT&T is definitely interested in going at this site as well. If you have any other questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
So I know we do have questions for staff, so I will start on my left. Commissioner Galvin.
So one of the questions, David, was process. When we look at aesthetics, is it only relative to what's currently there or what may be there in the future?
Well, you're considering the aesthetics, you know, of the project that's, you know, before you. And certainly the surrounding context is part of that, you know, aesthetics. It's partially why with that last one we did, which originally was proposing a monopine of this nature, that we suggested alternative designs, and that's what the water tank came from. And most folks that I talked to have not had too much heartburn over how the water tank turned out. I think in that context, the monopine application might not have been received as well. So over here, you know, this context is important, and I think there was a comment from representative from Crown Castle tonight. You know, obviously it stands to reason that since there has been a monopine out there for all these years, albeit not always maintained and certainly not state of the art by how they're built today, that another monopine over there could be the way to go, and would be, you know, the least amount of change from what people have been used to, you know, for all of these years. But it doesn't mean it has to go, you know, in that direction. There's several different types of applications that can be used, and all of them can be built at the height that they need to achieve for the most part.
So I think I understand, but so I understand we're looking at the aesthetics of the project itself, but that does go into everything.
Well, the context of the area certainly is very important as it pertains to aesthetics, and whether you're in a rural environment, suburban, urban environment, what type of facility you would want to put in those environments could largely be dependent upon what's around it.
Thank you.
Julie Baby.
Thank you. Although I think style is important and location is important, my biggest stumbling block is the policy, and I'm struggling to find a path forward on addressing our ability to actually make a decision on this at this time. So let's say cart before horse, but do we need to be addressing the policy first, or are we here to identify the need to address the policy, and does this project then get postponed until we can address the policy?
Well, to the extent that the projects, you know, can't be modified in some way, shape, or form to where they would meet the policy, then we would be sort of seeking any direction from the commission tonight about whether the commission would be open to considering any revisions to the policy where we have this conflict. You know, so, you know, first step would be is if there was a way that these facilities projects could be, you know, somehow reconfigured in some way, shape, or form to where they would meet the policy, and if not, then we need some direction from the planning commission about whether you're at least open to considering some changes in the policy.
My
We
comment.
don't know what those would be, at this stage, but clearly we have one particular section that we're sort of hung up on right now.
I would be open to revisions in the policy, but we did spend a lot of time on it, and it took several meetings, and the existing monopine is one of the reasons that we were so specific on many of the details is because of the condition of the existing monopine. I understand that it was an older monopine, and the newer monopines are much better. They actually look like trees. This looks like a monopine, or I'm sorry, this looks like a monopole with some branches stuck on it. But nevertheless, it was the reason that we spent so much time scrutinizing the stealth towers. I would like to get a little bit more clarification on Mr. Hard's property. I wasn't aware of power access. I missed it in the...
We are still reviewing those
Okay.
aspects. Both applications are incomplete still at this stage. But given we have some policy considerations here, we definitely wanted to bring them forward, even though this is a little bit earlier than we might typically, but in foreseeing policy questions, that's where we need to get planning commission input so we know what our next step should be.
As we were addressing the policy, the tower was there, the existing tower was there, and right now we're looking at a gap as a result of the tower not being there. And I think we would have addressed it a little bit differently in the policy had this existed at the time. That's why I'm open to revisions to the policy. I don't believe we need 2 trees, and there was a reason that we put that language in there as well about co-locating on towers and not locating any towers within a certain radius until each tower is completely full. In this case, if you put 4 on it, they'd actually have it, but there still might be a distance. So anyway, but that all gets back to the policy. So anyway, those are my only comments. Thank you.
Yeah, there might be a need for a revisit to this policy for sure. One of the resounding things, though, when we were creating the policy, I heard from I think almost everybody here was our goal was to try to minimize the effect on the residential areas. Now, from what I've just heard, one of these projects doesn't have a residence on it, and one does. I don't know if that's a technicality but applicant for project number 2 brings up a good point when he points out that now we would set a precedent that anyone with a large enough lot that can meet these setback requirements and these height requirements and all these other things could potentially put up a cell tower. And I don't think that's what we want. So that would be one of my comments. The other is, it seems like project number 2 doesn't call for any removal of trees, if I'm correct. And it seems like that might be more amenable to the rural environment up there.
You guys kind of came on a fun night.
Sorry for the background noise.
Are you looking for staff concurrence on the tree
Well,
removal?
The first thing was more along the lines of, I think our policy, I think everybody thought that, hey, this is in order to bring the residential zones, give them some relief from the potential of having a cell tower that didn't belong in their neighborhood. And now we're looking at putting up a new cell tower on a residential property that has a resident.
Yeah.
And it just seems like we're reversing ourselves a little bit.
Well, this is I think a somewhat unique condition that we have. We probably didn't really anticipate, when we were working on the policy, because we wanted to update the policy before because we were starting to see some encroachment on residential areas, as the desire to get wireless coverage into residential homes and in suburban neighborhoods and everywhere has seemingly been most of the inquiries that we were getting from carriers and tower owners, at the time. And so here we have, a residential area, be it a largely rural area, fairly low density. So this is not, that's also why, the policy, if we remember, we had quite a bit of discussion about the microcell, concept. Something Commissioner Moore was very much interested in, and so was the City Council, as a matter of fact. That's why we actually had to take the policy back to them a second time to sort of, beef that part of it up a little bit. In this particular, we were focusing on the suburban neighborhoods under the presumption that, we're not going to put a cell tower, right in the middle of Summerfield Drive or something like that, but that perhaps the microcell application might be the way to go, in that context. Here, yes, we're residential, albeit rural and very low density. The microcell application that we sort of theorize would be the most likely application in a residential area that would not be as intrusive, say, as some type of pole, tower, tree, windmill, what have you, is likely not practical out here because, the density isn't there. So then we're sort of back to, unfortunately, kind of back to square one, whereas if you're going to have a facility in this area, you are talking about some type of artificial structure of a certain, fairly substantial height is really the only thing that might be practical over here. So it's partially why I think you see some of the quandary we're in and why we wanted to bring this to you tonight, even though these applications are still both in the very early stage, because there is a policy question here that's really, I think, sort of bubbled up to the top, is in this particular context, how could we do a facility over here if one needed to be in this general area? There are a couple of parcels over here where, potentially a site could be put that would meet the policy, the 200-foot or twice the height of the tower, 500-foot, threshold. But one of those is the property where the subdivision, was actually approved several years ago, and that tentative map is still valid, so that property owner doesn't sound like they would be particularly receptive to having it there. And so realistically, you're coming down to the question of, well, is there anywhere where someone could put one and comply with the policy, realistically? And if the conclusion is that there really isn't anywhere that's practical, well, then we have a policy question to consider, keeping in mind what's provided for in the federal law that we have to comply with.
Right.
So we are somewhat in a box here. There's no doubt about it. And so if the commission is amenable to at least considering some changes in the wireless policy, even if they ultimately don't have to approve them, then that's one way we can march forward. Otherwise, the projects need to be modified to comply with the policy, and that may or may not be feasible. So we're struggling similarly, as I sense the commission is struggling with these two applications. Even if it was just one of them, we'd be similarly struggling.
Sure. I know you guys worked really, really hard on that, and I would hate to see that the spirit of that policy get undone by saying, here, you have a residence, go ahead and put one in your backyard. That's all.
Barry.
Commissioner?
Yeah, I think this is a terribly hard issue that you have before you, but I think one of the things we need to consider if we're going to look at the policy is that it's rather unique that we have a pole out there. We've asked him to remove the pole, but we have nowhere to put it. That makes it tough. And that's probably really the issue here, more so than anything else, is if we need the coverage, which I haven't seen that documentation that we need the coverage, but if that's what we need, and we've asked him to take down the tower, then maybe we need to try to help accommodate a tower somewhere. So that would be, yes, we could revisit that issue. And I think it's probably more important that you meet with both the applicants to see, if Mr. Hart's tower could come down from 120 feet to 80 feet like what is currently being offered there, or if the Crown Tower meets the criteria, if they could move it somewhere else on the lot. I don't know any of those answers and wouldn't have a clue, but I think we need to sit down with them and say, here's our criteria, where would your tower be, and can we do it? that would make the most sense to me. Hopefully something will work out in that area. But if it doesn't, then I think since we've asked them to take down the tower, we may need to look again at our policy.
Well, we will certainly go through that exercise of, seeing what, if any, revisions could realistically be made to either application. To clarify, it's WESAFCA is the agency or entity in charge of, acquiring the property for the levee improvements. And so that's sort of what precipitated this entire endeavor. But be that as it may, we have asked for some of those coverage maps, and we've gotten a few just trickled in just in the last day or so. So we weren't really prepared to bring those to Planning Commission this evening. But it certainly stands to reason if you can visualize where the other facilities are in this general area.
Right, it might help us a little bit.
They're not close by, so.
And I think, I watched Mr. Rusich out there when they were talking about there was a roadway, and Kathy said we had no roadway, and he's going, yes, there is. And Rick says there's power at his thing, and you said there's no power there. I mean, I just don't know how we got so far afield on that we were missing all these things. But, I think when it comes back to us, we need to make sure that we're talking apples for apples. If he's got power, if he's got roadways, we need to know that. And, I don't know if Mr. Rusich needs to speak before us tonight or not, but I saw him nodding out there, so I assume he was either falling asleep because he was bored or he was agreeing that that's what was going on. So I just think that staff and the applicants need to get together real quick and see what we can do, because if we need that coverage, then we got to figure out how we can do such a thing.
Mr. Moore, and just in terms of the road.
What did I do wrong?
Nothing.
Okay.
In terms of the roadway, we did hear very late in the day today from Brian Johnson, the fire marshal. We were concerned about fire access, and it does look like fire is going to be okay with the narrow width of the road for Mr. Hart's project, provided a turnaround can be provided for the trucks at the bottom, and it looks like probably there's enough room for that. We had not heard the power issue, but that is...
I mean, just when it comes back, I think we just need to know what we're dealing with. If there are issues on either project, if the road width is an issue or a turnaround is an issue, we need to know those things.
Sure. Mr. Hart's project came in a little later than the Crown Castle project. We haven't sent him his correction letter yet. The issue of power was one of the things we were going to ask him. All he needs to do, is provide us that information, and that would clear that up just fine.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
Commissioner Guerrero?
Oh, somebody's raising their hand.
That's Mr. Rusich.
Mr. Rusich, did you have something? Would you like to come up to the podium, please?
I'm Ken Rusich. I'm manager of West Africa and also manager of Reclamation District 900. I just want to clear up a couple things. First of all, we haven't completed CEQA on our project, so officially we don't have a project. So we have a couple more months to go before we can make offers, we haven't notified Crown Castle that they have to move. What we've done is told them about our project and the potential impact of our project on their property. But we can't officially make offers or take any legal action until we have an official project, which is a couple months away. So we've been working on this a long time, but we're getting close. But the footprint is that you show on the stuff that you have is the footprint that's being proposed right now. And so in a couple of months we'll take action to do that. And then on the terms of access, the normal process says that West Africa acquires property, builds the project, and then they turn it over to a local maintaining agency, which is Reclamation District 900. And so if there's a 20-foot maintenance road at the total levee for us to maintain, to do flood fighting, to do whatever we have to do with it. And the normal process for utilities, we have a lot of utilities that use our easements for access to their facilities. And so normally we would require from that person, from that utility, an encroachment permit that talks about, maintenance of the road and potential damages and hold harmless and that sort of thing. So if the access issue would be dealt with by Reclamation District 900 after the project was turned over to us. But the main thing I want to make sure is that we really don't have an official project for a couple months yet. So let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. That's all. That's all. It's a 20-foot road, yes.
Commissioner Guerrero, did you have any questions for staff or comments?
I just have a few comments here. Just wanted to add that I appreciate all the commissioners' feedback on this. It's helped me to really think through different things that I haven't thought about here. Recognizing that we will need to make a policy change, but taking into consideration the concerns from the residents. We've made a decision in the past related to location and residential concerns, that as we move forward, we maintain that sensitivity and just try to make sure that that's addressed thoroughly. In looking at council's memo, it was helpful to see what the recommended action is here on page 5. Looking at what our exposure could be, and if there's anything else that we can add to taking a look at it from a legal angle. If there's any exposure to anything there, that you just continue to fill us in on that as you move forward on making the decisions. That would be very helpful. Thank you. This is quite a challenging decision here, taking a look at the few different proposals and the aesthetics that we have to also hopefully take into account, if we can, as we're moving forward, and what the appearances look like, and making sure that if it's in a residential location that folks are feeling comfortable with that, and just bringing them along for those that are affected and impacted in that region.
Thank you. Commissioner Liebig.
Thank you. Thank you for coming back to me. I have a question for staff. What is the size of Mr. Hart's remnant property, assuming the project does go forward as laid out?
At this time, it's estimated that it's going to be approximately 0.8 of an acre.
Given the zoning, is the remnant property then suitable for residents?
It would be a substandard parcel by the zone minimum in that area. That in and of it, because it's a 1 acre minimum in that area.
Mm-hmm.
That factor in and of itself by zoning would not preclude development of a residence. Remains to be seen if one could be done practically in this area, given that, I know Mr. Hart says there already is a well there, but such a residence would also need a septic system, as well, and so it would have to be evaluated whether it would be practical to construct a residence on this property, remaining property, or not. But it would be a substandard parcel.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I have a couple of questions. And the fact that this project hasn't totally been, established, so we're going off of probable lot lines here that are takeaways that are going to be happening. I'm not quite sure how to proceed as far as what our boundaries are. So do we go back and look at the policy change, or do we wait till all of this until the new plan is put into place? I understand that this is just a workshop, and you want feedback from us, but I just have concerns with going going forward from here until the lot lines are reestablished, as far as Mr. Hart's property is concerned.
It may be some time until that property is, actually acquired, and I think as Mr. Ruzit said, they do need to have their environmental document, certified before they can actually make offers on any properties. The exhibit in your staff report, I believe, is based on, 65% plans. And so the levy program, the improvements, as we understand it, talking to West Africa staff, are rapidly sort of becoming, solidified as they bring their plans to 100%. So I think that the exhibit that's in there that shows the property acquisition is fairly solid for our purposes at this stage of, we don't expect that to change substantially at all. This is an appraisal document that was prepared, based on surveys and whatnot. So for our purposes here at the Planning Commission, I think this document in Attachment 5 is a pretty solid representation of what property would be remaining for Mr. Hart after West Africa acquires what they believe they need for levee improvements.
And do we have a timeline as far as when the existing monopole is going to be taken down and when a new one needs to be put up? Is this going to be something that's going to be happening at the same time, or depending on if we...
Certainly Crown
Which
Castle
application?
would want to have their new facility up and operational before they take down, the existing one. I don't know that the improvements and their need to remove that facility is imminent, but as they've described, I think they are trying to be somewhat proactive here and secure a new location so that there is no worry of ever having to go dark, in this area for any period of time. We can find out what West Africa's estimated schedule is for actual improvements, but I believe we do have some time here to sort this out before they would be coming through there and, building those improvements. But we don't have a ton of time either.
Right.
I would assume that they would likely begin construction on the levees in Southport probably sometime next year.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank staff for this public workshop, and when it'll come back to us as far as a hearing is concerned,
Well, what I expect we will do next is we will meet with both applicants, as I believe Commissioner Moore, suggested, and we will ask them to, describe, what they would need to do, to meet the meet that section of the policy, which is principally about the setback issue tonight. We haven't identified any other substantial conflicts with the policy other than that. And should that exercise not prove fruitful for whatever reason, we will likely come back before you with some options you may wish to consider as far as revisions to policy. And if there are some revisions that could be supported by the Planning Commission, we would take those forward to City Council. And assuming the council were supportive of those, then these projects could, proceed to hearing based on the revised policy, assuming they were compliant with that. So this is going to be probably the next step. I'm predicting right now might be coming back to the Planning Commission and for some options on revisions to policy. So that we potentially could do as early as next month, but we'll see.
Okay, thank you. All right, the last item on our agenda is the public workshop for the zoning for retail sales of firearms and ammunition. And Mr. Tilley, will you be giving us that?
Yes, I will. Thank you.
We might want to let them know to use the elevator. Oops, I got too late.
I think it might be evident because there's people on the balcony area. No?
If I say something to Charlie.
Sure. Please do.
All right. Regarding this item, I think as the Planning Commission knows and probably expects, we typically do a whole slate of zoning ordinance amendments, each year that cover a variety of topics. This year, we're really not expecting to do that because we were definitely going to be up to our eyeballs in the general plan update. And so we may bring, a few specific topics forward for consideration, but we won't be doing a whole gamut of ones like we have done in past years. But one of the topics that the Planning Commission may wish to consider, this year has to do with retail sales of firearms and ammunition. Our current zoning ordinance addresses retail sales of firearms and ammunition as a primary use, and that use is conditionally permitted in several zones of our city, including most of our commercial zones and mixed-use zones. It is silent, however, on accessory sales of firearms and ammunition, and I want to make sure it's clear that when we're referring to this, if I may not say it, we're referring to it when these are being done in a retail capacity, where you would have a store that would have inventory. You would walk in, be it a sporting goods store or a store that focused on firearms, that type of retail environment. The Planning Commission may recall a couple of years ago that we had what we called the firearms broker concept come forward to us, where several persons were interested in being essentially a broker for persons purchasing firearms, typically like over the internet or in a catalog, where these are persons that hold a federal license and they sort of broker that transaction. They do the background check and they actually receive the weapon from the manufacturer, hold it until the waiting period is up, and then they provide it, to the end buyer. So those are more of an office environment, and where folks wouldn't have an inventory other than maybe during that temporary time while the waiting period was ticking. So the Planning Commission, ultimately Council, did codify that type of operation. But tonight we're really talking about truly a retail environment, a store with a storefront that persons could walk in and potentially acquire, weapons and ammunition. So Mr. Brett Dawson, who's been the owner of a business here in town called American Tactical Outfitters, made some inquiries with us over the last couple of months about potentially opening a retail firearms store in our central business district. And this was of some concern to us and also the city's police department, and noting that it was a conditional use as a primary operation. However, Mr. Dawson's proposal did make it appear that he could be doing, since he has other types of things, products that he would have, that it could very well be that portion of it being firearms and ammunition could be of only an accessory use, which is typically 25% or less of the overall inventory. So given that the zoning ordinance is silent on whether or not this can be conducted on an accessory basis, since it's very clear how it provides for on a primary basis, we wanted to bring this topic forward with you this evening to see if the Planning Commission is interested in considering any changes to how we deal with it on a primary basis, but then to also consider some options for how it could be done if it were also done on an accessory basis, both in a retail context. So that's sort of the background tonight. So there are certainly some options the Planning Commission could consider if you feel like this is a topic we should address. The Planning Commission certainly could leave it right now the way it is right now, where it's very clear that sales of these items on a primary retail basis is conditional in a handful of zones. We don't advise that necessarily, because at least that leaves the accessory sales, vague in our ordinance, because it essentially is silent on them. Planning Commission could then, also look at maybe changing some of the zoning districts, where retail sales would be allowed, and then include that both as a primary and accessory use. Or at a minimum, we could at least address how they're being done would be done on an accessory basis. So there may be a few other options to consider, but those are sort of the primary ones that staff wanted to throw out, tonight, noting we are in a workshop format. We're not going to make any decisions tonight. But if you have some input for us on this and do think it's something we should be considering, we can prepare some more formal options for you at a subsequent meeting. So that's sort of the basis of it. I believe Mr. Dawson is present tonight and may wish to speak on this particular item. But at this time, we would like to hear where the Planning Commission is at on this particular topic, and if there is desire to look at this more closely, some general direction on that would be appreciated.
Thank you. Mr. Dawson, would you like to come up and speak?
Good evening. I'll make this brief. For the last 3 years, I have owned American Tactical Outfitters over in Northport. My lease ended at the end of February, so I've now surrendered my license and am not engaged in any type of firearms sales or brokering. Last year, looking at a larger retail option here in West Sacramento, which includes a portion of retail firearm sales of what I want to do in my business plan. I started looking at the zoning and primary and accessory use and even the definitions that are in the zoning ordinance, and hence my questions to Mr. Tilley and his cohorts. So I guess it's more of for me, when I look at it, it's more of an issue of where to put a store like this in the city. And I think having researched now and looked at all the available spots under those zonings is very difficult. I can tell you that no one wants necessarily anything, regardless of what else it's doing. There's not too many options for a business that's going to sell firearms as far as landlords or property owners in the areas like Target or Nugget or Lowe's or Walmart, IKEA area. And then I had mentioned the central business districts. I did find a few property managers that were considering allowing that type of function in their properties, and that's when I first proposed or suggested how would it be taken in that district. So personally, I don't see myself moving forward with the central business district at all. It would be nice if this commission would consider down the road, possibly in like the light industrial. I think it's more appropriate. I guess that's my opinion, but I think it's away from a lot of the schools, a lot of the concentrated areas where you may not want a firearms operation going on. I mean, that's just my opinion. But going into accessory use, I guess I'm kind of asking. I've asked the city for a definition of what's accessory. If I'm going to be under 25% for firearms and ammunition, can I be somewhere else without a conditional? And accessory as in, I suppose, like gunsmithing or as a gun range or a manufacturing of firearms, there's a retail aspect to it. So that's why I've asked all these questions of trying to figure out, again, where the best location would be for me, and then if that's going to be a possibility with the city, then move forward with the application process.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I just ask him one question?
Yes.
Were you going to do anything other than gun sales?
Yes.
I mean, were you selling fishing poles or?
My intention would be sporting goods, and actually on the lines of a background about myself, I have about 14 years in law enforcement, so I have a lot of contracts with state agencies like the Highway Patrol or Alcohol Beverage Control, military, National Guard. So more than just firearms, more equipment, safety, duty gear, apparel, uniforms. I mean, you can go into a million different things, but I focused on the way the zoning ordinance is written of staying under that 25%, if that allows me to go into a different location. So I just pose these questions that hopefully maybe get an answer or a definition at some point. Maybe the commission will be able to do that.
You're asking the most restricted part, like
Well, it's
yeah.
very broad. Well, I mean,
Right.
the primary use is primary use for guns and ammo. I understand that's probably over 26% by the way I look at the definition of accessory use. So but then you get into the dealer broker definition that says no retail sales. So
Right.
there's no middle ground. It's very gray.
Right.
And I'll also add with the definition of the dealer broker ordinance, it says no retail sales. However, in order to get the permit from the state, the city authorizes a business license that says retail sales of firearms is authorized. Plus, even if I'm transferring a firearm from a customer that's ordered online, the Board of Equalization looks at that as a retail sales. So the wording's poor, I think, in the dealer broker definition. I think we're violating. It's a matter of opinion, but maybe violating it every time because it's a retail sale, whether you're transferring it or not. I mean, I understand. I think the intent is an over-the-counter sale, somebody coming into a store that's full of inventory and selling a firearm, but it's just there's not a whole lot of definition or guidance, and that's what I'm asking.
And I agree with Mr. Dawson. That's a big reason why we're here on this particular topic tonight. He is correct with respect to the firearm broker concept that is, by how the feds and state look at that, is technically a retail transaction, although it's certainly not the same as going into a over-the-counter type environment, which is really what we're trying to get at tonight, is to perhaps we want to open up a few other zones where that could be done in a manner that could be compatible and supported by the PD, and perhaps give folks like Mr. Dawson maybe a few more options to where landlords might be more amenable to having a type of business that he is proposing in there. And so I think our initial thought would be is maybe we want to consider a couple of other zones to entertain this on a retail basis, be it primary or accessory, and maybe not think about neighborhood commercial and community commercial anymore for this type of thing. It's not something that comes up all that often, but obviously we have Mr. Dawson and at least one other business in town that's sort of on the edge of how this thing was set up in the first place. So we do think it would be advisable to clean some of this up so it is a lot more clear about where one can do this, be it primary, accessory, or both. So if that would be something we could bring back to you, if that was commission felt we should probably clean this up.
I would be in support of that type of proposition. I'm familiar with the type of operation he's describing, and I think it's some of the uniform stores and the equipment stores that the law enforcement agencies use, and most of the people that go in there and hang out there are law enforcement people buying stuff, buying equipment or what have you, and most of them that I've seen are well-run, clean, responsible business members. So I would be in support of that. I'm curious maybe it's not the time to ask, but I saw in the report that the PD had some concerns, and I'm just curious what those were.
Well, is mostly about location in terms of I know one of the particular locations that was proposed to us for the Mr. Dawson's facility was adjacent to the library and the community center, which has the daycare and other facilities around it, and there's another church over there, and that may not have been the most optimal location for a facility like this in their mind. I had anticipated the police being here tonight, and they must have had a more pressing matter to get to tonight, which they often do, to handle some of these kind of things. But we've also have been attempting, and scheduling has been difficult, but a direct discussion with ourselves and the police and Mr. Dawson about some of his objectives and how we can arrive at something that can work for everybody. But the police definitely have, as you can imagine, have a strong interest in this topic. Sure. And we'd like to have some more formal input from the PD for you when if we return on this item, because we prefer to move forward with something that can be supported by everyone if we can.
So obviously we'd love to hear from them. Some things you may consider are distance requirements from schools and churches. Put a proposal together. Those exist in some businesses that are required to get CUPs, for instance, alcohol licenses. There's already a sort of a history of them there, so maybe that's something to consider if you can't eliminate them completely in those zones, if you're considering those zones, if you just get them a certain distance away. I'm curious on the accessory use. So it doesn't take a large area for the firearms as a piece of a business like that. Is the floor area sort of an industry standard, or a percentage of your retail sales an industry standard?
Well, that's, how our accessory uses are defined. They do refer to area of a building. There are some, different metrics that we have applied in the past where, that metric really didn't, make sense. Like in some examples, we've had some businesses that wanted to have a subsection that was selling, products of adult-oriented nature. And even though those may have taken up a fairly small percentage of the floor area, it was a significant portion of their business. And so it didn't really seem fair to say that it was incidental to and subordinate to when it was, 3/4 of their revenue, as an example. So in this particular application, we may want to consider a different metric, just something that's more realistic to the type of operation that would be here in this situation. But our number one problem why we're here is that we're silent on when this is being done on an accessory basis, and we recognize that Mr. Dawson's business would have numerous other products in this sort of same general vein, but they aren't specifically firearms or ammunition. So we wanted to try to get some direction and clean some of this up, so once and for all we can have this. And we do recognize that Mr. Dawson and many of the others that we had spoken to in the past were all almost all law enforcement persons, or that was their principal clientele.
Sure.
And so we recognize that that's out there, and we think we can accommodate it in some way, shape, or form. But our current ordinance may not be the most optimally set up for that.
I agree, it's a gap you need to fill, but I think if there's going to be a difference in where we allow them, the zoning areas we allow them, we have to provide an acceptable way to define. And I don't think floor area is the way, so I think you have to look at something else, because.
Yeah, and it may not even matter if we change.
I may be wrong, but that's kind of the way.
We
I see
may
it
not,
at the outset.
an option. We may not even need to worry about primary or accessory anymore.
Yeah.
You can just say it if you're selling firearms and ammunition at all.
Here it is.
Then this is where you can do it, be it permitted, conditional, what have you. That could be a way to simplify it.
Commissioner Lieber?
Thank you. Joe and David, you hit everything I wanted to bring up, but I'll highlight the things I'm really interested in. I would actually like to hear from the police department on the zones that they would find acceptable for sales of firearms and ammunition. And then we would need to review those for permitted uses or potentially conditional use permits. And yeah, like you said, one option is just remove accessory use and have it either be a permitted use or with conditions, regardless of floor area or percent of sales. So, and I would love a sporting goods store in the neighborhood. So, anyway, that's it. Thanks.
Yeah, I would generally say I'd be for keeping it like it is, or even expanding it. Consolidating the conditional, consolidating the primary and secondary definition into one. I don't know as it's really beneficial to split the two out anymore. I was curious though. This is an issue I follow fairly closely, and in the Chicago, or the McDonald versus Chicago decision that was given out with the handgun ownership in the city of Chicago. The city of Chicago came back and tried to regulate, it seems, on gun sales. And I think this was just pretty recent, like in the last few months. They got that overturned. I mean, they lost that. That went to court too, and they lost.
I know there have been a few cases recently, I think even at least one here in California, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know the particulars of those, but we'll look into those with the city attorney.
Yeah, I was just curious what authority gives us the right here, or gives us what gives us the authority to regulate this sort of thing.
Jeremy, I'm curious, were those prohibitions on sales, or were those zoning issues on where you locate?
I believe they tried to do it through zoning. I could be wrong. This was just recently, though.
I know there was at least one that was dealing with concealed weapons, permits. A little different animal in this, but presumably this is still something that can fall under our land use authority, since we are trying to think of this as a land use, not about who can own them and who can't.
Right, and the case that I'm thinking of was Chicago's reaction. I think they tried to use this is a land use authority, and they got, I could be wrong.
We'll look into that for sure. That's a good tip for us to investigate.
But I mean, that's where it was maybe 2 or 3 months ago.
I'm not familiar with that case, but I will certainly look into it. However, the city does retain police powers to control land uses by type. So as long as we're doing it by type, we'd still retain the ability to identify which zones we'd like this to be allowed or conditionally allowed.
Okay. I don't have any more questions.
Commissioner Moore?
Well, I would have to agree with everyone that I'd love to see a sporting goods store here. And we've had a sporting goods store here in town at Big R. They sold guns, they had a shooting range, they sold fishing poles and everything else out there, and there was no problem whatsoever. So, I don't know how much we're going to control it, but to have something like that come to our town, I think would be great. And I just encourage us to, I just don't know how we decide what the percentages are and how that works. And whether it's necessary, I don't know. I defer to people like Joe that are in it all the time. They probably know better than I. But I think it'd be great to have something like that come to our town. So I encourage you to stick with us a little while.
Commissioner Guerrero?
Yes. Well, and I'd also like to add that I appreciate Mr. Dawson's decision to not have his business in the Central Business District, given the concerns that have been identified and you acknowledged based on what I heard. And I did have a conversation with the police chief about the concerns raised here, and they're similar to what you have raised, David. And so I think that taking into consideration exactly where's the best locations that we wanted to amend these zoning changes, and appreciate your collaboration in the effort, so that because you have the insight and the knowledge as to this type of business and what's needed. So just continuing to work with the folks here, so that we can come up with something that is workable for you. And love to have you in our backyard. It's good to have that business out here.
Well, I guess the consensus is that we would want to bring this back up, and
we'll work up some options for the commission to consider at a subsequent meeting, and get going on this.
Okay, great. Well, that ends our regular agenda. Could I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Second? I'll second. All in favor?
Let's stay longer.
Thank you.